This episode is sponsored in part by StrongDM. Transitioning your team to work from home, like basically everyone on the planet is? Managing gazillions of SSH keys, database passwords, and Kubernetes certificates? Consider StrongDM. Manage and audit access to servers, databases like Route 53, and Kubernetes clusters, no matter where your employees happen to be. You can use StrongDM to extend your identity provider and also Cognito to manage infrastructure access, automate onboarding, offboarding, waterboarding, and moving people within roles. Grant temporary access that automatically expires to whatever team is unlucky enough to be on call this week. Admins get full auditability into whatever anyone does, what they connect to, what queries they run, what commands they type, full visibility into everything. That includes video replays. For databases like Route 53, it's a single unified query log across all of your database management systems. It's used by companies like Hearst, Peloton, Betterment, Greenhouse, and SoFi to manage their access. It's more control and less hassle. StrongDM. Manage and audit remote access to infrastructure. To get a free 14-day trial, visit strongdm.com/SITC. Tell them I sent you, and thank them for tolerating my calling Route 53 a database. Back at the start of these unprecedented times, my business partner and I hosted 2 Q&A sessions. Our attendees asked a bunch of questions about AWS accounts, and then I've compiled them here into this, and lightly edited, of course, to make us sound way more intelligent than we were the first time around. The first question was, do you have any questions about the organization master account also being the consolidated billing account? Which is an excellent question, and my answer has changed somewhat recently. Now, there hasn't been an official AWS announcement on it yet, but at least as of the time that I'm recording this, the APIs within AWS organizations have changed to show that you can now delegate certain tasks to subordinate accounts away from the master account. To be clear, master account is AWS's term, not mine, so please don't send me angry emails, to a subordinate member account, something that I've been ranting about on Twitter a fair bit as of late. The master account has an awful lot of power in your AWS organization. There are things that you need to do within that master account that can't be done anywhere else. That's where your cost and usage reports wind up getting delivered, for example. In order to analyze those reports, you're probably going to have to use Athena or maybe Redshift or Snowflake if the VC money fairy has whapped you upside the head with their money wand. So you're going to need those reports delivered as Parquet files and periodically have a Lambda function or a glue job firing off. There are a bunch of other tooling options here, but by default, every AWS blog post or tutorial on the subject features some combination of these services being provisioned inside of the customer's master account. Now, at the Duckbill Group, we do all of these things for our clients, but we make it a point to first copy the data out of their master account, and it's incredibly important that we do that. Here's the point. You don't want any infrastructure to live within the master account if you can avoid it. That account is superpowered, and it's an AWS best practice to have no infrastructure there, at least as little infrastructure as you can get away with. Apparently, the AWS billing team has yet to receive that memo in full. Personally, I would love to see additional options around delegating various billing and payment functionalities to a member account. Finance people at mature shops, for example, need to have deep access to an awful lot of that data, and you probably don't want them in the organization's master account for reasons that can become painfully apparent mere moments after you could have benefited greatly from that information. The master account is also what gets explicitly tied to various contract agreements you might have with AWS. The account that dictates what support looks like for your organization. The account that determines who is inside versus outside that organization itself, and more. If someone has access to all of that, then you've got problems. Most mature shops can't let someone who has access to production also be able to access the audit logs for who has accessed production because embezzlement. The bottom line is that there are a lot of things that need to be broken apart here, but the quiet API changes that I'm seeing offer me tentative hope that they're listening and there will be an announcement sooner or later. The next question I saw was that, are there any unique aspects to the root user account? What are those aspects, and when would I ever need to use the root account after I set up IAM? The root account inside of an AWS account is generally used on a day-to-day basis only by folks who have not yet been exposed to IAM or who have looked at IAM and run screaming away from the complexity. Don't do it. It's an overpowered account in many respects. You're going to need to use it to change your support plan. You're going to need it for certain tax credits. There's a few other assorted tasks that AWS has a list of on their website that only the root account can accomplish. But to their credit, that list is far shorter than it used to be. In practice, the real problem you see around root accounts and responsible organizations is that people do the right thing. They set a tremendously long password. Then they set up a multi-factor device that's required to log into the account, and then they secure that multi-factor device in a fireproof safe. And then what inevitably happens 2 years later when they need to access the account is that they can't find the safe. If this is you, open an AWS support ticket and be prepared to wait a few days. If you're looking to wind up standing up infrastructure but don't want to spend 6 months going to cloud school first, consider Linode. They've been doing this far longer than I have. They're straightforward to get started with. Their support is world-class. You'll get an actual human empowered to handle your problem rather than passing you off to someone else like some ridiculous game of ticket tennis. And they are cost competitive with any other provider out there with better performance in almost every case. Visit linode.com/morningbrief to learn more. That's linode.com/morningbrief. The next question is, what are some of the tagging policies that we recommend to our clients? Because everyone wants a tagging strategy and no one seems to have one that they like. Having a tagging policy at all instead of a haphazard mess would be a good first step. We recommend a few. Team, department, if there's a larger organization at play, accounting, where you would set the values to COGS, R&D, G&A, etc., in order to make things easy for the finance team, service, to define what larger part of the application this thing contributes to, and here's one people miss, data classification for regulatory compliance. Is this sensitive from a GDPR, PCI, or HIPAA perspective? As you're building out your tagging strategy, remember you want to talk to your finance team. They're going to be asking questions 6 months from now, and you're going to want to have the data to answer those questions with a single query instead of an 8-week-long data science project. Cost allocation tags are not retroactive. They only start allocating from the hour in which you apply them. Therefore, you're going to have to confront my greatest personal fear, planning ahead. Also, give up now on the idea of trying to get everything tagged. If you can set a baseline of 80% or better, you're outperforming almost everyone. In most cases, you're not an organization where you're required to spend thousands of dollars to allocate the last 20 cents. Lastly, never, ever expect people to tag things by hand. They won't. If you want decent tag coverage, well, then tagging absolutely must be automated. And only once all of that's done are you going to realize that tagging also has serious security implications because it can be used to grant access to resources. But that's the subject for another day. What's your recommendation on automatically shutting non-development environments down outside of working hours? First, turning off developer resources out of hours is great for cost savings. But the first time that your 6 p.m. shutdown gets in the way of someone who's fixing something, you're going to be in trouble. I like the model in theory. If I designed something like this, I would do two things. First, I'd validate that developer or non-prod environments are meaningful cost drivers. One time, I got disgustingly far down this path before discovering that it wasn't a meaningful spend component. Oh, your development environment is 3% of your bill, and you haven't bought a reserved instance since the Eisenhower administration. Then, assuming that the development expense was worth optimizing, I would set up a scheduled instance turndown approach, and I would hook it up to a Slack bot that would shoot messages to developers, saying something like, "This thing is turning off for the night in half an hour, click here to keep it open." This is where cost and allocation tagging becomes useful. You're also going to want to make sure that the system is carefully tested and calibrated. It takes more work than you think to get something like that dialed in. Because remember, the first time the cost savings effort breaks something, you're not allowed to save money anymore. If you have more questions about AWS accounts, I'd like to think that I have answers. And if not, I can find them. Drop me a line. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review of 5 stars on your platform of choice at lastweekinaws.com/review. Whereas if you've hated this podcast, please do the exact same thing, but leave a comment telling me why I'm being unfair to whatever service team at AWS you work on.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.